Is artificial intelligence your friend or your foe as a writer? Maybe, just maybe, by the time I'm done with this presentation, you'll be thinking it's more like your friend and me. Writers nowadays, there's a lot going on in the world of artificial intelligence, and sometimes it's hard to follow the ball. I'm going to present this to you, and I'll talk about Chat GPT a lot, for example, just because that's what a lot of people are using. But there's all sorts of new ones out there, Claude 2, and there's other things that are coming onto the scene constantly between Midjourney and Dolly and 11 Labs, et cetera, et cetera. So everything that I'm going to tell you, just kind of keep in mind that it's a good idea to do the research because in an hour from now, there might be a new fantastic AI announcement that is going to change the world. I would like to start by bringing up my presentation and really thanking Lucia and the folks at the RV Book Fair for inviting me to participate in this year's event. It is truly an honor. I think that as writers, we have a lot to take in constantly. Yeah, I founded Black Chateau. That's my agency. I also have founded the Book Fest and Books That Make You. So, as somebody who's done a lot of bookish brands and worked with a lot of authors and understands the world of marketing and PR and authors and publishing and writing, woo, you as a writer have so much to keep track of. And now you've got this new thing that's on the scene. You may have heard things or you've read an article, maybe you heard an interview on the radio. There is so much going on that what I'd like to start with is my philosophy on the fact that I think more than ever, it is important to be human. Our humanity is what matters. Readers and writers, we have this agreement, don't we? The reader who slips into your skin and reads your words, who sees the world through the character you created, or reads about your experiences in your memoir or your nonfiction book. It's all the same. Well, there's this guarantee that this content is giving them insights and a view of the world that is human. When it boils down to it, that's what story is. And I feel that that contract cannot be duplicated by artificial intelligence. AI is a tool. It's like Google, very much like what Google is or a search engine. It assists us. Imagine now researching your book without Google or Wikipedia or whatever research tools you might be using. Think of how 20 years ago, not even, if you wanted to do research, you were going into the library. And trust me, everybody still should be going into those libraries and using those resources. But just like anything, times change, our tools change. And I think that AI is a great tool for writers if used responsibly. There are ethical things that are involved, and we'll parse that out a little bit too, because I think that content that is too reliant on AI is actually not advisable. It breaches that writer and reader contract. And not only that, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, but besides ethical, there might be some legal and copyright issues. There's a lot of lawyers and things going on right now. So I would advise, at least at this point in time, take it easy with relying too much on AI. But the cool thing is, it can be used as a tool. It can be your friend of me. Give ChatGPT your writing style, for example. You can use it to capture your voice. Say, for example, you're writing an article and you write lots of article. You're probably doing it as part of your blogging strategy, right? You're supposed to have a blogging strategy, a newsletter, and social media. You can give ChatGPT an example of your writing. You say, hey, ChatGPT, here's an example of my writing style, tone, and voice. Can you capture it and produce in your future outputs writing in my tone? It can do that. So you're not taking something or deriving it from somebody else's writing. You're giving it your writing style. And now you can use it to help you write some of those articles and blog posts. Um, You can add various sentence structures. Have you ever had it where maybe you fall or rely a little bit too often on a certain sentence structure, the way you phrase things? You can ask ChatGPT to rewrite your copy for you. Maybe you wrote something and you just want to freshen it up. It's almost like a word salad, right? You want to push it all up into the air and have it fall down and still make sense. It can be your copy editor. You can use it to punch up your copy. I've asked it that. If you're ever uncertain, ask it. I asked it once, hey, Chat GPT, do you know what punch up means? Can you punch something up for me? And it said yes. And it described what it meant. It said, basically enhance, et cetera, et cetera. You can give it different style guides. For example, most writers are using Chicago Style Manual. You can give it the specific style guide you want it to use and have it help you with research. It can go back in time with you for historical content. You can use it to help generate ideas. That chatting feature, the fact that it chats makes it so much more interactive and easy to use than a traditional search engine. Always, always, always make sure that the human element is there. Do research and double check some of the things that it gives you because it sometimes can have that imagination and it can mix things up. Just like you would probably check if you had hired a research assistant or a copywriter to help you write something. You're still going to check, you're still going to edit over the top of ChatGPT. Imagining your characters is another thing that I think that writers can use AI for. This and many of the images that you're seeing in this presentation actually have been created using Midjourney bot. There's other image generators out there. There's Dolly and so many more. Have fun researching them. But for our intents and purposes, this image that you see here was an author friend of mine. And we're playing with it. We're sharing the screen. I was like, so describe for me the main character in your most recent novel. And he did that. And so I typed it in, and this was one of the there was four, examples given at a time. This was one of the very first ones. And he was just like blown away. He's like, that's my character. And being able to visualize a lot of times for writers helps. So if nothing else, you can use this to create your character so you can see him or her and get an idea of what she looks like. It's like you're putting yourself, immersing yourself in your own scenery and with your own characters. Be very careful and be aware of licensing and the usage of these images. For example, I have given photo credit. I'm saying fully, hey, this was from Midjourney bot on Discord. I wouldn't suggest using this for your cover, or at least if you do so very, very carefully. You can use it to give your cover artist ideas. If you've ever wanted to, write something down on a napkin or do a rough sketch, Midjourney and other image generators can do that for you very, very well, but still have that artist use it as a jumping off point. And just remember that there are some issues right now with different artists who are basically saying, I have not given permission for this. There are models out there like Adobe and others who are being very careful about licensing and getting permissions. But again, go too far into that. I want to get into right now some of the predictions, though, as AI becomes our frenemies. I don't think it's going to go away. I don't think this is something that is just a flash in the pan. Mm-mm-mm. This is not like NFTs or some of the other things out there that seem like they come and go out of style. I think this is going to stay, and we're going to need to find ways to work with it. I do believe ultimately in human written books and content that it's going to become more valuable than ever before. Think of how, if you really wanted to, if you need furniture, right? You can go down and I think the shelf behind me or the bookcase behind me and beside me, my desk, they're from IKEA. Gotta love IKEA, right? But if you really wanted a really quality desk, you might go with Amish made furniture, for example. So I think the quality of human versus artificial intelligence is going to be very, very hard for AI to keep up with. That authentication is on the horizon. If you think about how Twitter and X are verifying users, I think this is a step toward verifying one's humanity online. AI written books are going to get better, but written by humans or for humans is something that is following. Even Amazon just recently is asking the authors how much the book is written by AI or if it's AI assisted writing. I do think that personal AI assistants, think Jarvis from Marvel, those auto agents are going to be very, very helpful and they're going to be able to interact with a lot of the different apps and our email and the things that we have to basically do a lot of things for us. I'm very excited about that. Live events, though, I don't think it's ever going to be replaced by AI. Those types of things I think are going to become more powerful and more in demand. Authors doing readings and book signings and being at conferences and writers' events. AI is going to help authors who could never afford to do things like an audiobook to be able to clone their own voice. Yeah, that's possible now, and narrate their own book with it. There's AI voices that can narrate books too. I'm not suggesting you replace the voiceover artists, but if an author had limited funds and never could have afforded to do an audiobook in the first place, well, AI might be able to help give them a leg up. Cover designs, illustrations created by AI, all of that. I again suggest the ethical route, but that's going to become more and more prevalent. I want to thank you for joining me for this presentation. And again, thank you to Lucia and the RV Book Fest. Friends, do not, whatever you do, please do not be afraid of artificial intelligence. I believe it is our frenemy as writers, and it is something that's going to grow and expand and really give us an amazing tool to use as writers now and into the future. Thank you.
Welcome to Uncut with Lucia. I'm Lucia Motoronto, and we are thrilled to have you back at the RV Book Fair 2023. Please give a warm welcome to my co-host for this event, Pat Barclay. Pat is an author with 7 published books and has been my co-host since the very first RV Book Fair in 2022. So welcome, dear Pat.
Thank you so much, Lucia, and thank you for inviting me to join you again. It's always such a joy to be here. Today we're joined by 3 exceptional authors, book authors, who are discussing the art of writing. First up, we have Meghan Arcuri, hopefully I've said that correctly, who's an accomplished author and the Vice President of the Horror Writers Association. Welcome, Meghan. Maybe you'd like to just introduce yourself briefly.
Hi, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I really am happy to be here. As you said, I'm the Vice President of the Horror Writers Association, but actually only until October 31st. That's when my term is up. I serve 2 terms, and my replacement is ready and to go, and I'm thrilled to see the direction of the organization. I'm also a writer and occasional poet, but most of my work is short fiction that can be found in various anthologies and online.
Wonderful. Yes, I see that now you're publishing books for kids. That sounds great.
Yes, I did. Just finished or just released my first children's book, which is not horror. So that's been fun. It's a whole learning curve, a whole new genre to work with, and it's fun. It's been a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. And next we have P.L Hampton. P.L is a dark fantasy author and lifelong educator. Are you a lifelong educator? Yes, it's correct.
Yes. I'm an educator. Yes, I am a professor as well as a current law student. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So, could you please tell us something about you?
Yes. Other than being in academia and like I said, currently a law student, I've worked in finance, in the finance industry early on part of my life. Always been in love with writing. Always had a passion for the written word. I love the places that it can take me, the different worlds, the different people, different perspectives that I can meet, and different, introducing people to different places, new worlds as well. That always has interested me, and I've always gravitated. My lane has always been sort of the horror lane or paranormal lane. I like to say paranormal, with a mix of usually based around family and interactions that happen, horror based on maybe family secrets, families playing with things like in the new book, playing with things they're not supposed to play with. So that's basically where a lot of my imagination goes, and a lot of places, a lot of where a lot of my thoughts and ideas come from.
Sounds great.
Thank you. Thank you, P.L. We're also honoured to have Jonathan Pruitt with us today. Jonathan is an author and a lifelong educator who's taught around the world. Is that right, Jonathan?
I have. Let's see, I've taught and lived in South Africa, Namibia, Ecuador, and Australia at various points in my life. And now I dwell in Tampa, Florida. Yeah, that's right. And I used to be a faculty member studying spiders, and more recently, I've reinvented myself as a fantasy author, and seeing how that skin suit fits, and I'm rather enjoying it.
Well, what a great experience is to be living in such exotic places.
That's
It has
exactly
pros
what I
and
was going to
cons.
say when I almost butted in. Yeah.
Like
Thank you.
sometimes like Namibia, after Mongolia, it's the second least populated country on Earth, and it's beautiful. But I'll tell you, each of those places has pros and cons, and so like, it sounds majestic, but you spend a lot of time in isolation. So pros and cons.
But a wonderful experience, I'm sure. Hopefully we'll learn more about it as we go. Okay, let's start. Meghan, could you share a bit about your journey as an author with us, please?
Absolutely. I'm one of those people who didn't have a pencil in her hand from the womb. I was originally a math teacher, and I did that for a few years, or probably about 6 years, and then I got married and had children, and we decided that it would be best, if I stayed home with the kids to raise them. And so during that time, in addition to dealing with all the newborn and toddler stuff, I just started reading a lot and a lot of paranormal, urban fantasy, that kind of thing. And I was like, oh, I can do this. This is fun. This is great. And I sat down at my kitchen table and I was like, oh wow, this is a whole lot harder than I thought it was. So I found various workshops, and there was one in particular. It was called Borderlands Boot Camp that I went to, and it happened to be run by a bunch of horror authors, and so it drew a lot of horror people in. And I met a lot of horror writers because of it, and then made some friends that way. And they said, well, hey, why don't you try writing horror? And I said, oh, but it's horror and it's scary and I don't know if I want to. But then I tried and I realized how much fun it is to write horror. It's just a really wonderful place to write from. And then I've just kind of gone from there. That was about, gosh, I guess 10 or 12 years ago at this point. So I've been really just, jumped into the horror writing community and made a lot of great friends and connections, and have learned a lot about writing and writing horror, and just enjoyed it a lot.
It's good to know that math teachers can write.
Yes. But people make a lot of fun of math, and I get a little sad because I know how much fun it actually is. I know that's hard to believe, but yes, math teachers can also write.
Thank you. And let's go, P.L. While you've graced our Relatable Voice podcast, it was such a pleasure to interview you there. So could you provide our audience with more insights into your background?
I am born and raised in Seattle, Washington. Go Hawks. Um, I'm very much avid traveler. I love to travel the world. Been to many places. Although Africa is still on the bucket list, still intend to go to South Africa. I haven't been there yet. I really want to honestly climb Kilimanjaro, to tell you the truth. That's next on my list. But yeah, I'm an avid traveler. I love to write. I love to do my best to stay fit, and eat good. Writing for me has been started for me. Not it wasn't it wasn't kind of it was I did kind of came out of the womb with a pen, but for me, it's more a cathartic thing. It was something that my mind would just race, and I would always carry a pen and pad around with me all the time. And I would just write stuff down. And I never really got into horror. It was more I started out with poetry, I'm trying to swoon the women and the girls. So I was writing poetry, thought I was a Lothario at that time when I was doing it. I was so young. But I thought it was cool to write poetry. And I was always writing short stories, short fiction stories. It wasn't horror, it was just short fiction. And then for some reason, my mind, my stories started getting darker and going to different places. But I found by tapping in and going, writing horror, there was just such a wide world that I can go into in so many different places and nooks and crannies. I can go and write so many different things about, and have so many, my imagination was just free to run. It wasn't kind of contained in a box. So that's kind of basically where, my background, I also, like I said earlier, I was a finance guy. I was in the numbers, and a lot of people go, okay, so you're in the numbers, you're in the finance, and you write as well. How does that work? It's kind of like the math and the writing thing. But it for me, it just came naturally. Like I said, I'd always been writing as a kid growing up. Always had a pen and a paper with me, just writing down ideas.
Wow, PL, that's quite an evolution from, and I love your honesty, from writing poetry to woo the girls to writing horror. That's quite a journey. Fascinating. I'm looking forward to hearing more. Thank you. Jonathan, we'd love to hear more about your story as well, please.
Let's see. I guess you could say I'm the world's most infamous spider biologist. And so I graduated with my PhD at around 24 and obtained a faculty position at the University of Pittsburgh thereafter, and climbed the academic ladder and got recruited to Canada as part for Canada's 150th anniversary, and seemed to be going really well in my life. And then tragedy befell me, or possibly scandal. And I became engulfed in international controversy because in several of my data sets, people found odd numeric oddities, and I was engulfed in scandal for a long time. And at the end, things turned out to have been mostly exculpatory. But during that process, my reputation was destroyed. The media ran with the story. And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do with the rest of my life with my level of energy if people doubt everything I say, the veracity of whatever I say henceforth? And I thought, that sounds pretty bad, unless, of course, what I throw myself into next is predicated on the idea that it's not true, that it's a fantasy, and that, of course, it's incorrect, and of course, it's inaccurate. It's a letter. And so then I thought I could throw myself into this new creative medium where, I mean, I can still invest in this. I can still connect with people. I can still find a community. And I have to say, I have found the writing and reader community to be incredibly inviting and thoughtful and generous with their time and ideas and expertise. And when I was frightened and I had lost my sense of self and I'd seen that burned, uh, I think that those communities sort of adopted me, the writers and the readers, and I've really enjoyed that. The first book spawned from that, The Amber Minear, which is a dark fantasy series, but it's somewhere kind of a hybrid between like dark fantasy, magic school, Animal Farm, and a horror element that runs very deeply, a helplessness and a sort of psychological horror that innervates the setting and plot as well. So I would say it's a dark metamorphosis in the sense that I've gone from evil spider biologist into evil dark fantasy and horror author. I guess maybe they're both horrible. But but I have to say it's also a tale of sweetness because I went from being quite imperiled about my sense of identity, and I was enveloped by a new group of people, and that I don't think you hear about stories like that too often. So I'm thankful. Thank you.
What a story. You
I
can write a
know.
book about it.
I think that will happen one day, but not today.
Let's kick off our discussion by delving into what sparked your interest in this field. I mean, I'm very impressed that you all write horror and fantasy, because to me, I can't begin to imagine how to do that. I mean, I write like historical fiction and memoirs and travel and stuff. So for me, horror is totally the flip side. And I don't even like watching horror movies. I get scared. So I can't imagine how you can sit and write all these horrific things. I admire you all hugely. Anyway, I'm diversifying. Meghan, would you like to start by sharing what led you to pursue a career in writing horror, or horror and your children's book, I guess. What started you in the writing?
Well, like I said, when I did the workshop, I wasn't planning on writing horror. I was kind of in that urban fantasy, which is horror adjacent, but not really. Sometimes it's closer than others, but so I just happened to meet all of these people who wrote it. And like Jonathan was saying, that the community is so welcome and warm and supportive that they said, hey, you can do this, even though I was a little nervous at first. And then I realized, oh yeah, I can do it. And in fact, I like doing it. And I mean, I think horror is everywhere, so I don't think it's such a stretch to say that I can't do it. I mean, I think it's, every time you turn on the news, or I mean, even just, sometimes going out for a walk, you see things that are just, alarming. But for me, sometimes it's fun sometimes because I get to be a person that I'm not. So, if I'm writing the villain, I get to be villainous, and I get to say things that I would never say ever, ever, ever. And it's fun to kind of, adopt this personality in a safe space and say and do things that I never would. And then also sometimes it's a place for me to explore my own fears. So, it's, if I'm thinking about what scares me, I'll just kind of write about it, and it kind of releases the valve a little bit on all the tension I feel about those fears, and I get it out on the paper, and then I have a story that incorporates some of the things that I'm afraid of.
Mm-hmm. And out of curiosity, you now wrote a children's book called Milk the Cat.
Yes.
So what happened? What inspired you to write this specific book for children, which is not about terror?
Yeah, it's not. I mean, there's a little moment of like panic in the story, but it's not at all horror. And it was actually one of my best friends from college. I was visiting her, and she has two girls, and she was telling me this story about how one of them had her stuffed cat and brought it with them on vacation, and she got lost, and then it got found, and it was so sweet and beautiful. And I just said to her, like, in the moment, I said, this is so amazing, can I write this? Like, is it okay if I write this story? And she said, yeah, absolutely. And so I just ran with it because it was just so sweet, and I just was taken with it for whatever reason, and found a publisher who was willing to publish it. We found an illustrator who did amazing work with it, and I'm happy, really happy with the result. I hope to do more. Like I want, I have other ideas in that field as well, that genre.
Yes, I write for kids, and I just love writing for kids. I feel as if I'm a kid again when I start writing these kind of books.
They're fun.
And also for P.L, what drove you to create Shadowland?
My inspiration was my wife. I mean, like I said, I dwell in the genre of horror, but it was my wife. She woke up one evening or one night, it was like late in the morning, and she, I guess got up, went to the bathroom. When she came back, and she was like, there's a, she rushed back into the room. She's like, there's a shadow of a man in the living room. And I'm like, what? And so, but and I'm arguing with her because like, that's not possible. The alarm didn't go off. There's nobody in the living room. And she's like, well, what if they're standing outside? And you're just saying the whole chapter in the book is almost verbatim the conversation we had when she brought that up. But And immediately, though, once I went, and of course, I had to get up, go check, make sure there was nobody outside or in the living room. But immediately, my mind quickly went to, what if it's a ghost, it's a spirit, or something like that. And I say that because my family is from down south, from New Orleans area, that area around there. And so the hoodoo, voodoo, and all that is very prominent in my family down there. And my mom has always grown up telling me that she, sees spirits and that there's a shadowy figure when that would sometimes she would see whenever as she was growing up. And so that immediately clicked in my mind. And the story just came out from that. And I spent all that rest of that night. I didn't get much sleep. Just, I I wrote longhand. I usually keep a notepad by and I write longhand. And I just wrote it. I do want to touch on something that Meghan said that is so true. What about writing that I love? And that is you get to be that person. You get to be that character. You get to be that villain. You get to be that evil spirit. And you get to go, well, how would I, if that was me, how would I act? How, how horrible or terrifying would I be? And so that is one thing that I do. I think I get into too much sometimes with certain characters. They kind of take over. And like in Shadowland, there's one particular character. It's not an evil spirit, but I really liked her. And I wrote I got so much into her. And then I remember the editor looking at me and was like, who's this book about? So, I just wanted to touch on that. That is something that I find sometimes that I just really, really love about writing.
And I don't know if you realized that, but his wife was terrified and he started writing about
Yeah. Yeah, she was. She was terrified. And I was like, oh, wow, I need to put this down. And she's like, excuse me. She had to remind me, like, are you going to go out there and check?
But don't you think, and I'm sure we all agree with this, that you have to write when the thought comes into your head, because if you don't, it's gone. Like probably all of you, I get ideas at 3 a.m, and if I don't write them down, by the time I wake up, they're gone. They never come back. And I always think, oh, it would have been such a great book if only I could remember it. So I understand that whatever goes on, you still have to write it down.
Well, that's why I keep a pad by my bed. I keep a pad by my bed, and I carry a little Post-its with me sometimes because I might not be in the right place to start typing on a laptop. So I'll just jot the idea down.
Yeah. And don't you think we're lucky that we all have the ability to write things? Because so many people say to me, where do you get the idea from your books? And I think, well, actually, I live in the same world that you do, and I just get my ideas from the world and all the people around me. So I think we're very blessed. We're very fortunate, us authors, that we can transfer those ideas into words. I think that's my view. Anyway, Jonathan, can you share the inspiration behind your book, The Amber? Is it Menhir? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, menhirs. Yeah, they're standing stones like Stonehenge in Western Europe. Let's see. I guess, I always wanted to be a fantasy author at some point, and I, penned that in my mind as occurring sometime in my 40s, and then an opportunity, perhaps at gunpoint, emerged for me to have a philosophical pause where I could possibly act on this second ambition in my life and hope that I would be able to write a fantasy series. And I have to say, if whether I'd started writing a fantasy series when I was 16 or now, it probably would have been like a school setting. Then I am by my nature a mixture of light and shadow personally. And so whatever I was going to write was going to have dark flares to it. And so I had inhabited the ivory tower for most of my life to varying degrees as a student or a scholar of it. And so then I thought, well, why don't I take what I know so well, or what I think I know so well, and explore it in a sort of a warped, inside out, sort of macabre way. And so I created these menhirs, which are um, towers of institution and discovery in a fictitious world that are occupied by elite intelligentsia of vampiric scholars, not literal vampires, but vampiric in a to varying senses and in various degrees, and they've convinced the broader world that it is imperiled, that existence itself is approaching a great calamity. But the only way that the entire Earth, or in this case, this world, can circumvent this could-be calamity is if the vampires can figure out a magical means of solving it. But magic is expensive, and it is blood magic, of course. And so the scholars become very hungry. And so it's sort of like this dark, malevolent setting. And I thought, why don't I use the scariest things that I've interacted with in nature and the people and entities that I've seen that have abused various scenarios and use that to inform fictitious world, but an embellished world that would allow me to both make commentary to various degrees and explore the things that have frightened me most throughout my life. And I have to say, unlike, or perhaps in a similar way to the other speakers, I get to explore various kinds of characters that I wouldn't normally in nature. But I have to say, I'd rather empathize with villains, and so I have a harder time putting myself into the mindset of the good guys. I'm like, what would an innocent rube do in this scenario? I'm by my instinct, I'm a survivalist and oftentimes quite strategic. And so I have to think like, okay, what would the innocent, sweet Rube who's not interested in themselves at all, how would they respond? And I have to say that I think that that's helped the light sides of my personality sort of hypertrophy and and be headspaces that I dwell in more often. And even though I write up in a cynical world and a horrific world in my series, I think writing my books have made me a happier and less cynical person overall.
Jonathan, have you ever thought of being an actor? Because you're quite mesmerizing to watch. You're so full of enthusiasm in life, and it's fascinating. So I think the very least you need to do is make videos of recordings of your books, not just audio ones, because it's. Thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed that. Over to you, Lucia.
Let's explore about what we think it's a good book. Okay, so let's start with Meghan. Meghan, could you begin sharing your thoughts about what defines a good book? You can talk about kids' books because now you just published your kids' books, in your opinion.
Well, I mean, in general, and I think this goes for kids, adults, YA, MG, I think to me, it's about the characters, and is it somebody that I can invest in, whether they are like that innocent Rube that Jonathan talked about, or, if the protagonist is not, necessarily a good person or a good character, but can I still, be drawn to them in some way and root for them to, while they're on their journey. So I'm always taken with the characters. I'm taken with good dialogue. I want to know who they are, what they're thinking, and why they're doing what they're doing. And and setting is cool, but I'm always more into the where who the players are and why they're doing what they're doing.
And do you start with characters or with the story, the plot, when you start?
Oh, definitely characters. And sometimes I even just start with dialogue. Like I hear a couple of people just talking in my head, and I'll just, they're in this like white space. I don't even know where they are or what they're doing. They're just having this banter, and I'll just start from there and kind of blow it up from that place.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. P.L, do you concur with Meghan's perspective on what makes a book great?
Oh, exactly. Wholeheartedly. The same thing with me. I usually start with a character, or it's dialogue that I may hear someone actually say, but I turn it into a, insidious way, or, it says something, it means something ulterior or not. And then there is sometimes dialogue that I would have in my head, but it's more of like, I wonder if someone said it this way or said it that way. And then it would just, like she said, blow up. And I'm with her. I'm with Meghan on regards to the character. Doesn't really start with a plot. I have an idea, but then it's the characters that drive it. For me, it's kind of like I create these characters. I have an idea of the plot, but I sort of let the dialogue and the characters drive where the story's going to go. It might not go where I originally thought it was going. So it's like I said, the beauty of it kind of takes on its own life, and I get to play the villain. And I'm with Jonathan. Sometimes it's hard for me to determine what's the good guy supposed to act like, or the good person, how they're supposed to behave in a certain instance. Because I'm thinking more of like, oh, the villain's gonna do this, and that just seems more alluring and appealing to me. Or the spirit, the evil spirit's going to do this or that. But I am wholeheartedly agree with Meg. It's usually, for me, it is always the characters that kind of drive the story.
I feel the same. And you, Pat?
Yeah, exactly the same. I just was smiling as you were talking, because I know when I wrote my first book, I started with an idea in my head, and it became totally different, a totally different story, because my characters made up the story, not me. I just kind of had to be dragged along and think, oh, now I've got to research something different now because they've gone a different path. So yeah, I agree entirely, P.L. Thank you for that.
And Jonathan, what's your take on the ingredients of a compelling book?
Oh, I will say I think there are a lot of ways to make a compelling book, and but the way, and I'm not articulating that I've written a compelling book. That is up to you to decide if you decide to read it. However, my writing process is a little bit different in the sense that I come up with first a conflict, a kind of conflict that has an indeterminate morality to it. So an issue in society or between two individual characters that doesn't have a clear right and wrong, and there are lots of different rationales that could be used to argue one side of a conflict or another. And then I begin to construct the kinds of characters that would have those views and what their circumstances would be like. So I sort of reverse engineer from a conflict that I'd like to explore, either in a chapter or in a book or at a still longer story arc over the series. And then I think about, okay, what would the characters need to experience as a person for them to have fallen on this side of the conflict versus this side of the conflict? And then my books usually have a couple of POVs. I have 5 POVs throughout the entire series. There's three of the 5 books are drafted, and I intend to stay with those 5 POVs. But then I want, in some chapters, for you as a reader to develop a sense of empathy and understanding about an issue from the perspective of one character, and then lulled into a false sense of understanding that issue and how it must be because you've seen the internalization of one character, one side, and then later on in the book, you'll find out that this um uh, creation of like Frankenstein, like Victor Frankenstein's creations, like at the end of Frankenstein, you see, oh my God, this horrible monster actually had a rationale for what he was doing this whole time. And really in Frankenstein, it's that moment from the soliloquy, which is a long soliloquy about a monster at the end. Like I was upset too. And that I think was the beauty of Frankenstein, although that has such a long story arc to get to that moment. I thought, okay, what if I can do that several times at intermediate steps over the course of the series where we have an issue, we have a circumstance, where we have a villain in our mind, and then you realize a few chapters later, actually, I don't know if there's a clear outcome in this conflict, or I could see it from this other character's perspective. And so I do that over and over and over. And on the one hand, that makes everything sort of gray, but each of those confluences of conflict do lead into a longer story that is usually that is fulfilled within each book that has a normal story arc. Like there is an obvious antagonist at some point or another. There's an obvious issue. We have to make progress on that. But I first think about social issues or family issues and reverse engineer my characters from there. All right.
Wow. Okay, now I've got to read your books. I'm quite fascinated. I love the whole concept of even a horrific person has a good side. That's very appealing to me. Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Meghan, what did you find most challenging about writing your children's book instead of your normal horror genre?
I guess something really as basic as like punctuation. Like when I wrote it initially, I had like semicolons, and the publisher was like, no, you don't use semicolons in a kid's book. And so kind of like making the sentences like less complex and that sort of stuff, the grammar and the sentence structures. because it was based on this true story, and because I knew the woman who was telling it to me, I was able to kind of, come at it from a place of I'm also a mom too, so like coming at it from that place was helpful, and having kids was helpful. So that gave me the perspective. But actually, like the sort of technical parts of it were a little more difficult for me. That just like, okay, what's allowed and what's not here.
And was it easy for you to choose the illustrations? Actually, I love the cover, that cat.
Thank you. Yeah, well, the publisher chose the illustrator, and I also know his name is Agmios, the illustrator, and I know him as well. And he typically does a lot of dark fantasy stuff. Like his dragons are out of this world. I mean, he does the most amazing work in like a sort of Dungeons and Dragons category. And this was his first children's book as well, and he based the character on his daughter, and she had a cat too, and kind of a similar story. He was able to relate to it as well. So it's funny, I just wrote the text and he would come back with the illustrations, and there were a couple where I said, wow, that is exactly how I envisioned it in my head. So he nailed it. I was really happy with what he did with it.
You're lucky. Sometimes it's so difficult to find, a little illustrator who can understand what you want. You're lucky.
Bet. Yeah, no, he was wonderful. And he was open to suggestions too, and he had great suggestions. So his art really, it only enhanced the story. It made it so much better. So I was lucky. Yeah.
Thank you. And P.L, can you shed a light on how you infuse African American culture into your works while maintaining family and historical significance? Because I know you kind of blend also facts with fiction with real stories. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of my stories is based in facts. My first book, the fact of that was my own family history. And like I said, my mother's side of the family being predominantly from the Louisiana, New Orleans area, and growing up, being a kid sent down there during the summers and hanging out with my cousins there, and being exposed to, they call it hoodoo, but it's a variant of voodoo. And so being exposed to that, and the fortune telling, all those good things, kind of, that I think that's kind of where the horror kind of paranormal stuff started coming in to my thoughts and my writing. But I do a lot of research, like for Shadowland, it's based on African history, as well as African American history, African spirituality. And so I'm weave those into hopefully what I think is a beautiful tapestry and including the family of the protagonist in the book, and how playing with an ancient African artifact, not knowing, thinking it's just, oh, this is just something we found, this is cool, and toying with it and unleashing these spirits, these things that you go bump in the night, since we're close to Halloween. Those things that you don't want to experience, and a lot of how that brings together the family. And as Meghan had spoke earlier about the journey that your character goes on from there. But I really, it took me a long time on this book, Shadowland, because I did a lot of research into African history, slave trade, the divination trade, which is the main artifact that kind of unlocks this whole Pandora's box that the protagonist goes through, or that experiences. And it took me a long time, and I just wanted it. Of course, I'm going to exaggerate on it and embellish, but I wanted the foundation to be based in fact. So that's kind of where I came from with that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that sounds... Sorry, Lucia.
No, it's your turn.
I was just going to say that also sounds fascinating. Now I've got to read your book, because I have a great interest in all those subjects. I've got a long history with Fiji, and obviously, although they are from the South Pacific, their roots are in Africa, many of them. And I had a friend who got very sick one day, and she said, I took her to the hospital, we went to the doctor. She said, Pat, it's going to do no good. She said, someone's put the evil spirit on me. And that was my first, I was only in my 20s. That was my first experience of anything like that. So, I kind of investigated. So I'm absolutely fascinated with your story. So that's got to go on my to be read list. Thank you, P.L. Thank you. Jonathan, what do you find the most intriguing aspect of writing dark fantasy?
I mean, I guess that less is more oftentimes. I think like dark fantasy and when I think of the horror elements of dark fantasy, I'm not trying to write a snuff film. I'm not trying to show forced copulation. I'm not trying to just menace you for like shock value. I want to insinuate. I want to threaten you with something, and I want it to be believable. And in some ways, I think fantasy and paranormal horror show this in common. You have to be more real and more believable and more honest in your writing and character interactions because it's in a fantastical setting. And so, restraint and then holding yourself to some accountability and honesty of how your world works. Because when you've got these fantasy and paranormal elements, you risk writing stories that are either, snuff films or tawdry or seedy for no reason, which I think steam and horror and gore have their place, but I think that you have to build to them and crescendo to them, and it can't just be one dynamic. You have to have scene and sequel, and you have to have changes in the pacing and the intensity of conflict to make those scenes make sense. But then making sure that you don't write yourself out of plot knots and conflicts cheaply. So just because I have a world that has magic in it does not mean that I can have an 11th hour rule in magic that makes no sense. That gets my characters out of a situation I've written it into, or a plot knot I've accidentally written for myself. I can't everything needs to be seeded, and you have to try to hold yourself honest and accountable to the original rules that you created. You can't just be writing exceptions over and over and over, because the believability of the world, the realism to the paranormal elements, well, I think will fall apart, and it does a disservice to the readers. So I guess how honest you have to be, how restricted you have to be once you create a set of rules, and also that in horror and tension, less is more. I enjoy sinister interactions far more than I enjoy outright violence, like the threat of something terrible happening to you. Because I think that we're, as human beings, we're far more often threatened in our lives, and we're responding to that than as to the horrors that actually come true. Horrors come true for some of us, and all of us will have horrors that occur in our lives. But I think the threat of horror and the anxiety that causes is far more horrific for most of us, and that's what I try to capture, at least in a small number of scenes, before giving you relief, and then giving you a little bit more tension, and a little bit of relief, and then more tension, and do that in a cyclical process as the story builds.
Ooh.
Wonderful, thank you.
Meghan, are you planning to keep writing horror, or are you going to change completely for children's book, or you keep doing both?
I I think I'd like to keep doing both. I have I have a story that just came out in an anthology yesterday, and thank you. And I sold another one recently. So, and I do enjoy writing horror again because it's a release, and it's I don't know. Jonathan said honesty. I mean, there's an honesty to it, and I like grounding it in reality, and writing my experiences and writing the experiences of others that I think are meaningful. I think you can just explore things really well through a horror lens. But at the same time, I like the idea of writing children's books too. I mean, I already have another idea that I think would work really well for a children's story, and just another part of working another part of the brain that's just a little bit different, but also I guess similar in a way. I mean, they're all related, but yeah, I do see myself kind of doing both if I can.
Well, keep writing. Keep writing is the most important thing.
Yes.
P.L., I'm not sure if you're planning to write any more books, but somebody told me, I guess it must have been Lucia, that your mission is to inspire young people to follow their dreams, or one of your missions. Is that true? And if so, how do you plan to do that?
Oh man, yes, that's one of my missions, out of many. We kind of find ourselves being placed in boxes and situations and things of that nature, and a lot of people feel they have to, kids, individuals conform to a certain way and not be who they are and not be themselves, and not be able to think outside the box, to explore, to be creative, to be imaginative, to see the world in a different perspective. The one thing that's so beautiful about traveling when I travel is I get to see the world in a different perspective. I get to see it through someone else's eyes. And what I thought the way that something was, yeah, that may work here, but it doesn't work there, or it doesn't connect. And for me, I think that in people, period, not just children, needs to be unleashed, needs to give allowed to have freedom, allowed to breathe, if you understand what I mean by that. And so that's one of my inspirations in regards to that. Yeah, I really would like to inspire young people to chase their dreams, whatever that may be. I mean, I constantly tell my children, I don't care what it is you want to do, as long as you're doing something that you love, because I know if you love it, you're more than likely going to do it well. And then, and if you're doing something well, then people will take notice, and the money more than likely will come. More than likely, maybe not. But if you're happy, for me, period, that's like success, happiness, being happy.
That's wonderful, and so much my philosophy too, and probably all of ours. I just feel that, are we just on this earth to live, work hard, make money and die? No, we're here to help each other. And just a panel like this today, I've gained a lot from it, because we're all the same, really. I mean, you guys write horror and all these exciting things, but basically human beings throughout the world are exactly the same. All we want is to be happy, healthy, and to look after our families. That's really all any of us want, isn't it? And so the fact that we can, and you, PL, can hopefully inspire young people, I think is great. I think it's, yeah, really important.
But
Okay.
I do intend to write more books. I do have more in line. I have a sequel to Shadowland, and that one character I was talking about, I did decide to make it that she's going to have her own book.
Good for you. I think that's great. And I found, I mean, I only started my writing career in lockdown, so 2-3 years ago, and I only intended to write one book just to keep me occupied, really, instead of eating chocolate, watching rubbish on Netflix, drinking too much red wine and eating too much chocolate. That's the only reason I started writing. But now it's an addiction. I mean, I have to write. If I don't write, I kind of go a bit funny. So yeah, we're all very blessed. So I'm glad to hear you're writing another one. That's good. So once I've read your first one, I've got so much more writing to do. This is the only downside of co-hosting these panels with Lucia, is that I end up at the end of the day with a whole big pile of books to read, because I would say without exception, everyone I meet on these panels are fascinating, all totally different, and their writing is all totally different. But once you start reading it, it's fabulous, fabulous. So I feel very lucky that I get the chance to meet all you guys. Anyway, enough of me. Jonathan, can we expect more books from you in the future?
Yeah, I feel like I've made a contract with the universe that as long as I don't perish unusually early from circumstances yet unforeseen, then I'll at least finish the series, and I'm rather enjoying it. Uh, and I guess if people, part of it's I love the community of readers and writers that I've experienced so far, and if people jive with my writing and they like it, then I can envision more books. But I think first five will tell a story about these five characters and their zeniths and nadirs and their interactions and the conflicts that they negotiate together. And then thereafter, I might write prequels or one-offs, like origin stories for characters that I predict will be fan favorites. But yeah, right now it's these five. The first one is in good enough shape. It's out there in the world now. It's alive. It did okay. It's in its first few weeks. It only debuted on October 3rd, but it debuted all right. And then the second book is drafted. It's in a late stage of editing. Third book is drafted, but it's horrible, 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 and desperately needs lots of work. But I'm putting that out of sight, out of mind. get book 2 ready for around DragonCon next year in August. So myself and the narrator, so the narrator for the first book is Jeremy Lee. She's like in Street Fighter and My Hero Academia and Zelda and Sailor Moon, which these are big like nerdy things, but she's a wonderful vocal actress. Who developed her chops in anime, but she also was in a kind of a gritty horror video game called Cyberpunk 2077 with Keanu Reeves. And so she has a lot of these a lot of acting, but I don't think she's ever done a dark fantasy setting before. And so we collaborated together on this first book, and so hopefully we've got four books to work together. And I have to say, audiobook, that process of going with her through the script and listening to somebody narrating my writing, that has also changed how I intend to approach subsequent volumes to make sure, because I learned a lot about language, I think, from listening to someone articulating my words aloud. Oftentimes I can be floored in what sounds beautiful in writing or looks beautiful as well. The aesthetics of a sentence also matter, like how it looks matters a lot to me as a writer. Sometimes when I hear that through somebody else's voice, I'm like, you know what? We probably should have just made that sentence more simple or simpler. So I'm looking forward to watching my writing change and grow, and I think it will throughout the series as well.
Thank you.
Jonathan.
Thank
That's
you.
great.
So
I
excited.
think we are all our best own critics, aren't we? We all read our work and criticize it and redo it. And I have so enjoyed talking to you all today. Thank you so much for coming. And I'm very sad to say that concludes our panel interview for today for the RV 2023 Book Fair. But thank you all so much. It's been a joy to meet you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
all.
Thank you.
Heartfelt thank you to our wonderful guests for gracing us with their presence today. And Meghan, it was a pleasure, such a pleasure to speak with you and to learn a little bit more about your new book.
Thank you so
Milk,
much for having me.
of course. P.L, of course, it's always a pleasure to speak with you. And Jonathan, it was great. I think you were on the magazine, in our
It
magazine.
was. Yeah. Yeah, I was actually, yeah, just recently.
So your insights have been truly invaluable. And for more information about their books, you can visit our website, www.relatable-media.com. And thank you for watching Uncut with Lucia by wordauthors.org. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you. Thank you all.